Good morning again. You guys still awake? Just checking. See some people snoring. I won't say who, but no, it's great to see all of you this morning. If you don't know who I am Caleb, and I'm a missionary, as well as my wife, Brittany, is here as well. We are excited to share this morning about 4 months ago, I don't know, April, however long that was ago. I think there was still snow on the ground, right? Remember those days? They're coming, I hate to tell you. But anyways, back in April, we had the opportunity to share just briefly about our ministry, like 5 minutes. And as you know, there's a lot more to our ministry than just 5 minutes. And so Pastor Brandon and Marlena gave us the opportunity to have the whole service and share more in depth about our ministry and what we do around the country to address the issue of human trafficking. Now, for those of you that are like, I have a kid next to me, we're good, okay? We'll handle it. I know there's no kids' church this morning, but I will keep everything hopefully as good as we can as far as that goes. Before I get into my message, I was instructed by somebody to have Chris and Bonnet stand. I don't know if this happened last week. I'm assuming not. They just got married a week and 2 days ago, I think? What? Oh, right. So it was literally Monday. They just got married on Monday, and so if we could just give them a round of applause. Congratulations on that. Yes. I think we're like 2 weddings in like 1 week, so we're on a roll. Who's next? I'm just kidding. But congratulations on that. Excited for you guys and all that includes. So, but I want to share a little bit because some of you might not understand a little bit about what human trafficking actually looks like in the U.S. And also I want to spend some time sharing about like how we got called into this, how we even got involved in this, because a lot of people wonder, how do you end up in such a random ministry? Well, God, obviously, but there's also some other details that kind of encapsulate that a little bit. Who here has seen Sound of Freedom? Anybody, a new movie that came out? Who here has heard about Sound of Freedom, right? Everybody? It's this new movie that came out, and it's still showing in Perham here, about the premise of what human trafficking looks like in their view. Now, I'm not going to say anything bad about the movie. It's raising awareness. I'm going to take it from a different view in what it actually looks like here in the U.S. See, Sound of Freedom portrays the image of what it looks like in third world countries involving kidnappings and that sort of stuff, which it absolutely does happen like that in rare cases in other countries. But if that's the view that we have of human trafficking, we'll live our entire life not realizing it's happening 2 doors down or across the street, because that's all that we imagine that it might look like. To understand what human trafficking is, it is not kidnappings. You maybe have heard me say this little part before, but it is not abductions. It's not the Taken movie. Anybody seen those, right? Years ago. It's not that view of what actually human trafficking looks like, because less than 1% of victims will ever be kidnapped or forcibly taken. You've probably heard me say that before as well. So if all of us assumed that it was kidnappings and abductions and white vans and semi-trailers and interstates and highways and big cities and all this stuff, but it's really not happening like that, then what is human trafficking? Well, I want you to think even already up to this point how many decisions you've already made up to today, and you can know that you made a lot of decisions and a lot of choices, right? You decided what time to wake up. You decided whether or not to come to church today. You heard that Caleb was preaching, you still showed up. Or you drove in the parking lot and you saw it, you're like, oh no, but you're here, right? You made all these decisions about what to have for lunch later, but actually I want you to imagine not making a single one of your decisions at all today. Some of the kids are like, that's my life, right? Some of you are like, my parents make me do everything, right? But as we look at this image of trafficking, it's a situation where you don't get to decide where you spend the night tonight. You don't get to decide what city you might be in, and most aren't actually moved. You don't get to decide how many times you're sold today. Instead, it looks like victims in small towns. We work a lot in rural communities as well as Las Vegas. I know it's not rural. But we work in a lot of small towns, and a lot of kids, when we talk to them after realizing what's happening to them, will say, I never knew this is what trafficking looked like. I was never taken anywhere. I was never abducted. Instead, it looked totally different. It looked like somebody in their life exploiting them, forcing them to do things they don't want to do in order to pay for something that the individual wanted or needed. It looks like these small cases of somebody that knows you, because the leading form of trafficking is familial, which means 36% of our victims are exploited by somebody that they know or even more often related to. Leading forms of moms, dads, stepdads, etc. are the ones forcibly causing this. It's not some stranger at the Mall of America. It's the individual that's meant to keep our children safe, that are meant to be there in those spots and say, this will never happen to my child, instead are the ones to cause it to happen. You see, that's human trafficking in the U.S. Second leading form being romantic relationships, which means grooming. 25-year-old guy or etc. finds a 15-year-old girl, begins talking to her or him and telling them everything they want to hear. Maybe they met online or something happened, tells you you're beautiful, you're amazing, etc. And then all of a sudden there's the moment where the relationship changes and now you're being exploited. Not always for money, sometimes for a place to sleep at night, sometimes just to get a meal, etc. So if that is human trafficking in the country, I want to show you a map of Minnesota, of what human trafficking is in Minnesota. On the next slide, you'll see the map of Minnesota, and these dark gray counties are confirmed, convicted cases of human trafficking where somebody was arrested and also got charged and the whole thing, spent time in jail, etc. These aren't like suspicions. These are people in our communities that actually went through the whole process and were found guilty. You'll notice Ottertail and Becker and all the other counties around us are some of those counties, but for us, we're a small town, right? I mean, we know everybody in Perham, sometimes too much, right? We know our neighbors. Like, it couldn't be happening here, but we find what happens behind closed doors none of us truly realize, because again, it's behind closed doors. It's not a red light district, it's not a certain street or a corner, but instead behind closed doors. You might have heard some of these stats before, but some people maybe weren't here that week, but it's estimated that every 30 seconds, somebody will be trafficked for the very first time. That means since service began, 68 new victims since this service began today. Average age of girls being exploited is only 13, and boys are included in the average age of 11. The U.S. is always in the top 3 worst countries, right? So all these statistics, and here I was sitting in an office at a church about 10 miles down the road in Frazee, being a youth pastor and seeing this issue play out and seeing these things happen and knowing these statistics to be true. And the moment happened where I prayed a very dangerous prayer. But to go back even further of that moment, sitting in an office 10 miles from here, was a moment in 2014 when I graduated high school. So now you know how young I am. When I graduated high school, went to a ministry school in Cold Spring, Minnesota. And halfway through the year, I remember the day like it was yesterday, sitting at 7 a.m. watching a movie about human trafficking in our lifetime. Nefarious was the title of the movie, and I remember sitting there and for the very first time, growing up in a small town just down the road in Wadena, not even knowing that something like this could be existing in our world. Also, never learned this part in high school, in history, or in any type of class. I remember the lesson on when slavery was abolished. I remember when it was on the test question, but yet there was never the follow-up lesson in the reality that there's elements of slavery that still existed in our world today. So 2014, sitting in a sanctuary kind of like this, watching this movie for 2 hours, realizing that this atrocity was happening in our lifetime, and I wanted to believe 2 very big things. I wanted to believe first that this was a historical issue, something that we used to face in our world, that somehow the church had risen up, somehow the government or whatever had risen up, and something had happened. But by the end of this movie, I very clearly could not believe that any longer, as it portrayed true stories from around our country. The other thing I wanted to believe is that this is just a problem in another country. Like, not in the amazing country of the U.S. Like it doesn't happen here because we have an amazing country, and don't get me wrong, I love this country, but we have stuff like this happening. You see, I wanted to believe it was an issue in Thailand or Amsterdam or Cambodia or anything else. Anyone remember hearing that 50 years ago? I don't, but I'm glad you do, right? But I remember hearing about this issue happening somewhere else, but it wasn't until the last 10 years that all of a sudden we started saying, wait, if it's happening there, could it be happening here as well? So at the end of this documentary, I was literally weeping at the end of this documentary, and I usually don't cry a whole lot. My wife still harasses me for not crying on our wedding day. Sorry. Right? But sitting at the end of this documentary, knowing that this issue was there, and then there's a question of, well, what can I do? Right? 18 years old, I was going to be a youth pastor, and so at that point just said, okay, what can I do? I can raise money to address this issue and do what we can do. Ran a half marathon and then ran a 30-mile ultra marathon. I have not ran a day since. Yes, you can tell, but that's just the way it goes, right? I sometimes tell this story. I was at mile 26 when the marathon is supposed to be over, and I reminded myself I have 4 more miles to go. And it was the first day in my life that I ever thought kind of about if I just kind of slipped off a curb and kind of slightly got hit by a car, I wouldn't have to finish this race. Like, I'm talking like 20-mile-an-hour car, okay? Nothing crazy. And so I thought 2 things would happen. 1, I wouldn't have to finish this race. And even better, number 2, my donations would skyrocket. Can you imagine that Facebook post? Sitting in a hospital, right? I did, in fact, finish. But that was my mode, or what I could do in that time of my life to address this issue. 2019 came, and I went on a mission trip to Las Vegas for a week to see what I could do, because that's what you do, is you go on a mission trip, you do what you can do. And I thought it'd be a 5-day thing. It'd be awesome. I could check it off my list. I did something, and here I am. Right? But I remember standing in a massage parlor in Las Vegas talking to a young victim as if it was just any other ordinary day, where what was happening behind that closed door, as we all knew, was just something that everyone knew was happening, but it was just any other day. And I remember as that conversation ended and different things happened, as we went on with our week, I can still to this day picture this young girl's face standing in a massage parlor. You ever know somebody's story without ever kind of asking them their story? Like, obviously you don't know every detail, but you just know what happens in this girl's life is to be sold 10 to 15 times a day, and it's just this thing that exists in our world. And then I went home, and I was sitting in my office writing a sermon at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. Youth group is at 6:30. I know that's not the way to do it, but it sometimes happens, right? I'm sitting there trying to write a sermon about what I'm going to share with the students at that time. And I remember just not really having anything. Like, you're sitting there staring at a notebook or a keyboard, and you're like, I just don't know. And then on my mind was, again, 2 weeks previously, seeing that girl in a massage parlor and many other girls and victims knowing that they were being victimized. And I prayed that dangerous prayer. I said, God, why don't you do something? Anyone ever done one of those? Anyone ever prayed a dangerous prayer? You know, like when you pray for patience, you're going to have the most annoying coworker assigned to you all week, right? Anyone ever had that? Right? Or your grandkids, I'm just kidding, no. Whoever in your life, you end up spending way too much time with them. Well, that was for me, God, why don't you do something? I'm glad no lightning bolt, nothing happened, right? But there was this moment where I very clearly felt in my soul saying, what about you? I am, and I'm calling you. That type of a premise, and I said, I can't ask God to do something and then not do it if I'm called to, right? That started the almost 5 years now, the process in 2019 of stepping into this ministry saying, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to do every day whatever I can do to address the vulnerabilities in our world, to address and help those that are simply being exploited or whatever it might look like in their life, and offer them just a glimmer of hope. Obviously, that's the hope of Jesus, but first, we got to meet them where they're at. First, we got to say we know you need help. We know that you don't want to continue what's happening. And that is what our whole entire ministry has been founded on with Operation for Freedom. If you want to go to the next slide, we're going to go through a couple of the pictures of what our ministry has been doing. That's me, by the way. I look better on screen sometimes. Anyways, so as we go to Vegas, we go there a lot because we bring churches, missions teams, you've heard me say that before, to Vegas to address this issue, because just like you, or just like me, you might be saying, I want to do something. What does it look like? So we go to Vegas because it exists on the street level. It's not under the radar. It's not completely hidden. Now, is it illegal? Absolutely. But everyone just knows that it's happening, and no one is really able to do enough about it. So we go to Vegas, and one of my favorite things is going to these budget suites where it's cash on Friday, etc. Traffickers love staying at these places because they can leave tomorrow if they need to. They can go wherever they want. It's cash, etc. And we just simply offer food. Jesus did it, we do too, right? Jesus fed people. Incredible things happen. Simply giving out food is one of the greatest connections to people because everyone loves free food. So we go grill up burgers and hot dogs, give away toys. Just, 2 months ago, beginning of June, we had the world's largest water fight. I mean, we can't verify that, but we claimed it. In the middle of these budget suites, and these kids, we got like hundreds of these like super soakers, like from Amazon. And it was terrible because you were getting soaked left and right. But for them, it was the greatest day in their life. Many of these kids will tell us, the only day that we get to come outside and play, like out here with all these other kids, is the days that you're in town. They live in maybe 300 square foot apartments. Some of them we've been in there, multiple bunk beds, a whole entire family in this one little studio apartment. And sometimes many of the parents, a lot of times the dads, will be standing there watching their kids play in a safe place, and they'll say, I've never seen my kids smile this much in months. Because somebody's just willing to say, hey, we love you, we care about you. I don't have a picture here, but a guy named Albert, he's about yay tall. And we met him 2 years ago when we pulled into this budget suites in Vegas, and he was the kid that just simply seemed like he really didn't have a whole lot of friends. He was a kid that seemed to have just a lot of anger in his life in general. He was always wearing dark clothes with a trench coat, and I mean, that's cool and all, but it's 110 degrees in Vegas at night, right? Sometimes. And here's this kid. He would always have a Nerf gun, and that's cool and all, but he would always be going around at these things and just trying to just shoot everybody with a Nerf gun. And it wasn't really like a playful sense. You could just feel this kid had anger in his life and just began pouring into this kid. We just saw him at this one actually in June, and he's a totally different kid. He's wearing, again, not that colors have anything to do with it. I'm always wearing black, so I'm not saying it's a bad thing. He's wearing bright clothes, t-shirts, shorts, haircut, the whole thing, no Nerf gun in sight, and he is smiling, and he was the first one to go door to door to every one of his friends that he has now. So you got to come to this barbecue. You got to come. And I began talking to him. I'm like, hey, what's going on, Albert? What's your life? What's happening? He's like, you wouldn't believe this year I got all A's and B's. My life is totally different. Now, I'm not taking all the credit, but he said, because I knew someone in this world cared. I simply had purpose in my life. It's amazing what can happen just showing up in people's lives. If you want to go to the next slide. We also do missing kid searches. You've heard me maybe mention that before, where we go to certain cities when missing kid cases pop up. Obviously, they pop up every day. We don't take all of them, but this one was in Vegas, both of these. And in June, we were there going door to door in a strategic neighborhood where we knew that these girls are more than likely located based on different leads, different things that had come in. And within 24 hours, both of these girls have been located and found because somebody in that neighborhood had seen them just the day before. Just simply showing up, finding the vulnerable. If you want to go to the next slide, you've heard me talk about school assemblies before as well, but we go all around the country and speak in schools about a whole lot of different things: bullying, suicide, addiction, exploitation, online safety. There's a lot there. But we know that our students in our schools are facing the issues that I work on addressing, because average age 13, if you remember, average age 11. We know that it's facing our junior highs, and speaking in schools, and at the end of every school assembly, we basically do an altar call. Any Pentecostals in here? Anybody know what those are, right? At the end of the school assembly, we can't call it that, but we do an altar call, all right? Now, what we're doing is we roll out this big white piece of paper, and we line up the teachers, and we tell them, and it's all brought down to this one moment of saying, if you say something, today is the day that you will get help. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're facing today, even if nobody has listened to you in your life, today is the day that you're going to get help, just simply having the courage to say something. Most kids are not given that chance in their life. Now, many adults will say, well, they have their teachers, they have their counselors, but no one has ever looked them in the face and says, I will listen and I will do something about it. Many kids will say, I told somebody that I was being bullied and nothing happened, right? We hear all these stories. If you want to go to the next slide, there's one of these stories that was written for after a school assembly. It's a story that, as you can see, somebody that simply never had a safe place to go. Somebody that everywhere she turned, nothing good happened to her, and for her, it was the first day to get help. It was the first day for somebody to say, I'm going to listen. If you want to go to the next slide, it's a really big wordage, so I cropped it down so you can read just the first line, kind of. It says, I was going to take my life tonight, but this assembly changed my life. This was a 16-year-old girl in Mississippi that had every plan, everything written out, etc. Within an hour, she was going to be at home doing what she had planned to do, because no one cared about her life. At the end of the school assembly, one of our survivors, we have a survivor of suicide, we also have a survivor of human trafficking in high school, share their story in a very real and raw way. And the survivor of suicide that shares his story says, I never knew anyone cared about me until that day when I actually needed somebody. Never realizing there were people around. This young girl is now in counseling, getting the help that she needs because somebody said that they would listen. The next slide that you're going to see, you're not going to be able to read, but simply what I have on there is you can see the number of tear stains dropped on every one of those stories. This piece of paper was stretched across an entire school gymnasium from the one side to the other. And this school assembly, specifically this one in Mississippi, we have never seen so many complete stories written out. Usually it's like, I'm going to be a hero, or I like grilled cheese, or you know junior hires, right? But at this school assembly, there was so much pain, so much stuff that these students were going through, every story to be written out, covered in tear stains. It's the pain of our students that they're facing. It's the world that our students are currently living in, not knowing anywhere to turn. As we look at this is just simple, I shouldn't say simple, these are just a small element of the stories that we face. There's other stories that I would love to share, but as we are aware, cannot go as far as we normally would because of just simply what students are facing. A student in Michigan, I believe last fall, being used over and over again, mom checked out of life, all these different stories. A student in Missouri, his own mom at a truck stop every single weekend, etc. Stories and stories. And as we looked at this whole entire thing and this ministry and what we were jumping into, as we went head first into a pool that had no water, and then we said, okay, God, now what? What are we going to do? What's it going to look like? And simply, it was this idea of offering hope one person at a time. As we look at this idea of what can we really do, I want to look at a quick story in Luke chapter 10. It won't be on the screen, but I will read it. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Who here has heard that story? Who here heard it 50 years ago? I'm just kidding. No. Who here is, you know this story, right? It's kind of one of the main stories that's talked about at every Sunday school, etc. But sometimes if we just simply go back to the very basics of what we learned in Sunday school, it can completely change our life, right? We forget about those basic principles, and we look into the Greek and the Hebrew, but sometimes if we just back up and simply say, what did this story actually mean, is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25, it says, on one occasion, an expert in the law, stood up to test Jesus. It's always a good thing to do. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." It's my favorite part of the story right here. But he wanted to justify himself. Anyone ever try to do that with Jesus? I mean, they're really bad people, but Jesus, I'm good. Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like I can justify what I did because of this, because of my opinions, because of the things that I think should be done better. I can justify myself because I'm always right. Anyone have really good opinions? Me too. So he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Like, can we limit it down to just the person next to me that I live next to? Like, not everyone, right? In verse 30, in reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds." I want you to notice, he didn't just take pity and keep on going in his life. Right? You can have pity, you can have empathy, you can have, "Oh, that really doesn't look fun, but I'm just going to keep going on in my life." That does no good. Pity doesn't change lives. 34, he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." It's kind of an incredible story because, again, here's this man trying to just barely skate by into eternity. Anyone try to do that? Right? Sometimes it's like, as long as they make it to heaven. Sometimes that's our own, ambition. Here's a man that just wants to barely make it to heaven. "Jesus, what is the least that I can do, and you'll still allow me into heaven?" And Jesus fires back with, it's not really the least that you can do, but instead it's this whole story about not only seeing an issue, not only watching a movie that raises awareness, not only just saying, "Wow, that's a really bad thing," not seeing people that are struggling in life and saying, "Well, I hope they fix themselves." Anyone ever been there? Anyone ever had a flat tire on the side of the road and no one helps you, right? Or maybe it's other things in your life where you were struggling and you sat there and you saw people walk past you, maybe even with judgmental eyes, or maybe just simply not being willing to help you instead, and kept on going in their life. But here's Jesus saying, "I want you to stop everything." Like, here's a Samaritan man. I believe he probably had things to do and places to go. He had a donkey with him, right? He wasn't just on a random Sunday afternoon walk. He had things to do, places to go. And here's a Samaritan man that says, "You know what? I'm going to put everything on pause for the person in front of me that I know needs help, that I know in our case needs Jesus. I'm not just going to live my life and worry about the little things in our life and our opinions. Instead, I'm going to put all of that aside. I'm going to say, Jesus, who can I help today?" Now, they might get blood in my car or on my donkey. It might cost me a good amount of money, like this individual. It's all these different things. It says a denarius was the usual daily wage of a day laborer. So this man paid 2 entire days' wages to say, "Do whatever you got to do to save this man, and when I come back, I'll pay for everything else." right? This man didn't know this guy, anything like that, but you'll also notice that the first two men were too important, had too much going on. They also didn't just walk past the man, they crossed over to the other side of the street to stay as far away from it. Here's my challenge this morning. Can we stop walking past and ignoring the people that need Jesus the most? The people in our life that we sometimes don't even realize, or maybe in that moment it's not that you're giving them Jesus, but you're giving them a meal. Sometimes you got to start with that, right? Even Jesus, he did it. He says, I will give them a meal or anything like that. I'll feed the 5,000, anything like that. Would we just say, Jesus, it might cost me 2 days' wages, and not grumble about it and say, praise be to God? I pray that I wouldn't just skirt by into heaven, but that it would be like no question, if you know what I mean. Like every element, that there isn't a moment in my life where I get too important or too busy to say, well, I have other things to do. I think those other two men were probably on their way to church, right? They were heading somewhere, and instead they walked past. So to close, the big question, how can you help in the fight of human trafficking, as well as just in life in general, right? Because, again, to be aware of an issue and walk past does nothing, except you just know it's happening. The first is to pray. I know it's the typical. I don't say prayer just to kind of be the typical thing, but as we know, prayer changes things. And you maybe heard me say this before, but I don't want your prayer, go for it, I'll take it. But I don't want your prayer at lunch today and then just move on in your life. I want people that would say, you know what, I want to see this issue ended. I want to see victims restored. I want to see incredible things happen, and I will take this ministry, I will take what is going on in our world and very seriously get on my knees or sit in my recliner and take this issue to prayer. We need people that would do that, because that is when it changes things and kids are found. That is when incredible moments happen, when I know people are praying for us. Second is this, to change the culture around us. The fact that we live in a modern world today and people are buying people is not okay. But clearly there's people around us in our communities that are perpetuating this. I had a pastor of a church this week ask me, what are the two biggest ways that we could end human trafficking today? And I said, well, first of all, the content that we're viewing online that we should not be viewing. I obviously went more in depth with him. But that, if we could curb the demand of that, we would curb the demand of trafficking tomorrow, because it's the greatest fueling agent. Secondly, to address the vulnerabilities, to see the vulnerable people and offer hope and say, hey, you need help with your kids, I'll help you. Hey, you don't have food, I will help you. Hey, you need me to just come and listen to you and drink a cup of coffee and hear your story, I will be there. To change the culture means to find the vulnerable and offer them hope. The third and final way to address trafficking is to financially make an impact in what we do. Now, I know every missionary, it always happens, but I want to challenge you again. Knowing about an issue but doing nothing about it does not help. It just brings a lot more people that are aware of it, but it doesn't make a difference. Right now, we're raising the final funds. You might have heard me talk about this a couple months ago, in raising our school assembly trailer to have one based out of, New York Mills, Minnesota, but Perham, okay, close enough. To have our own school assembly equipment trailer, because our closest one is in Mississippi. They talk funny down there, by the way. And also, they don't like driving on ice, so they don't come from October till April, and that's the school year, right? So we are working hard to have our own school assembly trailer. What's amazing is we only have 7,000 left, but wait, there's more, right? No, I had somebody reach out to me last week and said, hey, I'm going to match the rest of that funding, so really it's only $3,500 that we need to make this thing happen before fall, and we have about a month. So if you would be compelled to give to make this happen, anything you give will be doubled, or maybe it's monthly. You say, I want to support this ministry monthly so we can go out and do what we do. I want to thank you for being here today, but for also considering, what is your call to the fight? Is it prayer? Is it raising your kids to know the value of life? Is it to give financially? Or maybe it's all three.
Thank you so much for checking out this message. We pray that you encounter God and that you feel challenged and encouraged in your walk with Christ.
We'd love for you to join us in person this next Sunday at 10 a.m. We have an authentic community ready to welcome you.
And if you want to give financially to the ministry of Northwoods Life, simply text GIVE to the number below or go to our website. With your help, we will continue to reach people in the name of Jesus Christ, whether it's here in Pearl, Minnesota, or through our partners around the world.
So please note that God is more interested in your heart than in your money. So be blessed, have an amazing week, and we hope to see you soon here in person at Northwoods Life Church.